Many regulations that aren't necessary, you really don't believe that the state we live in, California, is as lacking regulation. There's over 300,000 regulations. Maybe they're needed. Music, they're not. When I tried to put in a garage door, I had to have 3 inspections there. There should have been none. I should be allowed to change my garage door. Are you kidding? Really? It was about a garage door? Absolutely.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that is no. You know this about California, correct? No, I don't. Well, I'm sorry. You've never heard that California is overtaxed and overregulated. That we are a one-party state where there's sort of no checks on that sort of extreme leftism. Regular viewers of this program may recall my long battle to get solar power hooked up at my house. It involved this shed which had to be built to house the solar battery. Yes, that battery needed a house to live in. Laughter, and not just any house, one that had to follow the specifications of this chart. That's a real chart of the steps we had to go through to get this thing turned on. Laughter, Democrats have to stop thinking that what the voters dream about is to be hassled. If you buy a shed at Costco, it comes with this warning. Warning. This product, music, can expose you to wood dust. Wood dust. Laughter. California has a talent for turning common sense into a paperwork marathon. And honestly, that might be the most impressive thing the state does at this point. We're talking about a place where trying to improve your home, build something useful, or even install clean energy can feel less like living in America and more like trying to escape a side quest designed by a bureaucrat with a personal grudge. And that's exactly why this conversation hits so hard, because people are tired of being managed to death over every tiny detail of daily life. So before we get into this mess, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment if you've ever dealt with a rule so stupid it made you question reality. Because let's be honest, this is not really about one garage door, one shed, one permit, or one inspection. It's about a mindset. It's about a political culture that looks at every inconvenience, every rare mistake, every possible bad outcome, and says, you know what? This needs another rule. Not a better system, not smarter enforcement, not a little trust in normal adults.
No.
Another rule, another form, another fee, another office, another person with a clipboard telling you your battery needs a tiny little house before it can live on your property. At some point, it stops being governance and starts looking like performance art for control freaks. And that's what makes the whole thing so maddening, because most people are not anti-roll. They're not asking to dump chemicals into rivers, launch fireworks in dry brush, or run wild with zero standards. People understand that banks need oversight. Factories need regulation. Food safety matters. Building codes matter. Nobody serious is saying all regulation is bad. The real issue is when the people in charge lose the plot and start acting like every single problem in human life can be solved by making ordinary people jump through one more hoop. That is the disease, not regulation itself. Regulation addiction. California just passed a law requiring large retailers to have a non-gendered toy section. A non-gendered toy section. Isn't Ken enough? Applause, we need a law for that. You have to inject yourselves into everything from where you can throw a frisbee to who can braid hair. This is why so many people, by the way, were triggered by CO policies. They were already sick of rules. Regulation, music, should be a good issue for Democrats. It's certainly one they're associated with. And I think the average voter would agree that banks and chemical plants and drug companies need watching. You can see it in the way California approaches almost everything. There's this instinct to micromanage life down to the molecular level. You want to replace a garage door inspection. Then another inspection. Then, because apparently your garage door is now a matter of state significance, maybe one more inspection just to be safe. You want to hook up solar power, something politicians love to preach about nonstop.
Great.
Now prepare for a bureaucratic obstacle course so ridiculous it makes you wonder whether they actually want green energy or just want to hold press conferences about green energy. That's the joke at the center of all this. The people who claim to care most about progress are often the ones making progress impossible. Think about how backwards that is. We hear constant speeches about sustainability, affordable housing, infrastructure, innovation, and helping working families. Sounds great. Beautiful words. Real inspiring stuff. But then real people try to do real things in the real world. And suddenly they're trapped in permit hell. The solar project gets delayed. The house doesn't get built. The roof costs more than it should. The business launch gets stalled. The improvement never happens. And somewhere in an office park, a small army of regulators, reviewers, assessors, consultants, inspectors, compliance officers, and miscellaneous box checkers all nod solemnly, like they've saved civilization. Meanwhile, normal people are just trying to live. Regular viewers of this program may recall my long battle to get solar power hooked up at my house. It involved this shed which had to be built to house this solar battery. Yes, that battery needed a house to live in. And not just any house, one that had to follow the specifications of this chart. That's a real chart of the steps we had to go through to get this thing turned on. Democrats have to stop thinking that what the voters dream about is to be hassled. If you buy a shed at Costco, it comes with this warning. Warning! This product can expose you to wood dust. Wood dust. That's what makes the shed example so perfect. It's funny, sure, but it's also revealing. A warning about wood dust on a pre-made shed. Really? At some point, these warnings stop protecting anyone and start turning the entire legal and regulatory culture into a parody of itself. When everything is dangerous, nothing feels serious. When every product comes with a mini apocalypse label, people stop listening. You're not increasing awareness. You're just flooding the zone with nonsense until actual risk gets buried under theatrical nonsense. No kidding. Which is known to the state of California to cause cancer. That's right. California thinks you're going to snort your shed. Applause. I don't want to blow Pinocchio. I just want to put the lawnmower away. And that's a huge part of the frustration. A lot of this stuff doesn't even feel designed for practical outcomes anymore. It feels designed to make somebody somewhere feel morally superior. Like, if enough labels are printed, enough guidelines are posted, enough mandatory features are installed, then we can all pretend bad things will never happen again. But life does not work like that. Human beings do not work like that. Telling a company, you can't dump the waste from your hog farm straight into the water supply. We're mostly all for that. Laughter, but Democrats have become a parody of themselves, just making rules to make rules because it makes you feel like you're a better person. Making sure that everything bad never happens again, which you can never fully do. It just makes everyone else's life a drag. The Biden infrastructure bill has a provision that requires all new cars, music, to install an alert system that goes off when you leave a baby in the back seat, which is something done only by crackheads and people who sadly, yes, do it on purpose. And after every one of us winds up bearing the cost for cars to install this alarm, you know who's going to ignore it? Crackheads and people who do it on purpose. You cannot regulate your way to a world where nobody is careless, nobody is irresponsible, nobody makes mistakes, and nothing ever goes wrong. That fantasy is what creates this bloated monster. Take the push for car features that are supposed to idiot-proof every possible bad decision. On paper, a lot of that stuff sounds compassionate. It sounds caring. But there's a point where the logic goes completely off the rails. If one person does something terrible or negligent, suddenly millions of people have to pay more, deal with more alerts, more interruptions, more systems, more nonsense. It's also not safe to drive when you're crying. Should we make a car that follows your texts and stops the engine when you're dumped? Applause, racism is bad. How about a car that won't start unless you play a message about tolerance from George T? That's not always smart policy. Sometimes it's just mass inconvenience disguised as compassion. And that's the part nobody wants to say out loud. A lot of modern policy is built on the assumption that the public can't be trusted with basic responsibility. So instead of punishing negligence when it happens, they punish everybody all the time forever. That's why everything becomes slower, more expensive, and more annoying. The responsible majority gets treated like a problem because a tiny minority might do something stupid. That is an exhausting way to run a society. And people feel it. They feel it when they try to remodel a home and the permit fees make them want to scream. They feel it when a simple improvement turns into months of delays. They feel it when starting a project means not just paying for the work, but paying for the privilege of begging the government for permission to do the work. They feel it when every step forward comes with a bureaucratic ankle weight attached. A sensor light is not going to fix this problem. And Democrats no longer possess the common sense to understand that not every problem in the world can be fixed with a regulation. But don't tell that to the advocacy groups who also want every future car in America to only start when the driver blows into a breathalyzer. Snorts, oh great, my other car is a Karen. Laughter, this is where the political class gets it completely wrong. Voters do not wake up dreaming of being hassled. They do not fantasize about longer approval timelines. They do not think, you know what would make my life better? Another office to call, another inspection to schedule, another binder full of compliance standards. Nobody wants that. Nobody claps when a straightforward process gets turned into a soul-draining maze. And yet that's what keeps happening, especially in places where one-party rule gets so comfortable it stops checking itself. When there's no serious pushback, regulation becomes cultural. It becomes a reflex. It becomes the automatic answer to everything. More law, more oversight, more intervention, more process. Never mind whether the last 10 layers solved anything. Just keep stacking. It's the vast network of regulators, administrators, inspectors, contract reviewers, project managers, fee accessors, special commissioners, zoning officers, and consultants whose jobs seem to be to make sure nothing ever happens and then charge you for it. Laughter, the people who answer the phone, permit office. How may I hinder you? Laughter, but here's where it gets really absurd. Sometimes the rules don't even stop the thing they were supposedly created to stop. And that's the kicker. The burden is real. The inconvenience is real. The added cost is real. But the promised outcomes, not always. Because slapping a new mandate onto a broken system does not magically make that system competent. If existing laws aren't being enforced properly, adding new ones just creates clutter. It creates loopholes, contradictions, delays, confusion, and plenty of opportunities for the well-connected to navigate the system while regular people get crushed by it. Last year, Wyoming began construction on the largest wind farm in North America that will power 2 million homes in Arizona, Nevada, and California. And to think it only took 18 years not to build it, to approve it. 18 backlogged, knuckle-dragging, pencil-pushing, thumb-twaddling, ball-scratching years laughter, to finally get to yes when they started doing the paperwork. Leonardo DiCaprio's girlfriend wasn't even born. That's why this issue cuts deeper than a few jokes. It's not just funny, because some of these rules are ridiculous. It's serious, because overregulation changes the texture of everyday life. It makes initiative feel risky. It makes building feel impossible. It makes improvement feel punishing. And over time, that does something corrosive to a place. It drains energy. It drains ambition. It drains patience. A state can be blessed with good weather, natural beauty, talent, money, culture, and opportunity, and still slowly choke itself if it makes everything impossible to do. That's the bigger warning here. California didn't become frustrating because people suddenly lost creativity or work ethic. It became frustrating because the systems layered on top of everything got too heavy. When it takes forever to approve housing, housing gets more expensive. When infrastructure takes ages to greenlight, nothing gets built on time. When energy projects stall for years, costs rise and momentum dies. When every practical goal gets buried under review, revision, dispute, delay, and compliance theater, the result is stagnation with a moral lecture attached. And people are done pretending that's normal. That's why the sarcasm lands. That's why the jokes work, because humor is what happens when reality gets too ridiculous to describe with a straight face. A battery needing its own house. A shed treated like a chemical weapon. A garage door upgrade requiring a mini government summit. If you wrote this into a sitcom 10 years ago, people would say it was too exaggerated. Now it sounds like Tuesday. Many regulations that aren't necessary, music that aren't. You really don't believe that the state we live in, California, is as lacking regulation. There's over 300,000 music regulations. Maybe they're needed. They're not. When I tried to put in a garage door, I had to have 3 inspections there. There should have been none. I should be allowed to change my garage door. Are you kidding? Really? It was about a garage door? Absolutely.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that is no. You know this about California.
Come on.
No, I don't. Well, I'm sorry. I don't. You don't. You've never heard that California is overtaxed and overregulated. That we are a one-party state where there's sort of no checks on that sort of extreme leftism. And here's the uncomfortable truth for Democrats, especially the kind who think every criticism of bureaucracy is secretly some radical anti-government rant. This issue should actually belong to them. Sensible regulations should be their home turf. Smart consumer protections, safe workplaces, honest standards, fine, most people can get behind that. But when the brand shifts from reasonable guardrails to we regulate first and ask questions never, you lose the middle. You lose the normal person. You lose the homeowner, the worker, the builder, the small business owner, the family trying to improve their property without hiring a lobbyist. And once you lose that person, you're in trouble because that person doesn't care about ideological buzzwords. That person cares that a simple project now costs twice as much and takes 4 times as long. That person cares that the government seems weirdly committed to making practical life harder. That person doesn't hate all rules. They just hate being buried alive under dumb ones. That distinction matters a lot. And maybe that's the most important point in all of this. People can tolerate rules when the rules make sense. What they cannot tolerate forever is a system that treats them like children, wastes their time, empties their wallet, and then acts offended when they complain. That's when frustration turns into backlash. That's when trust collapses. That's when voters start looking at the entire machine and thinking, maybe the problem isn't one bad policy here or there. Maybe the problem is that the machine no longer knows when to stop. Because a government that never stops adding friction eventually becomes the friction. Regular viewers of this program may recall my long battle to get solar power hooked up at my house. It involved this shed which had to be built to house this solar battery. Yes, that battery needed a house to live in. Laughter, and not just any house, one that had to follow the specifications of this chart. That's a real chart of the steps we had to go through to get this thing turned on. Laughter. Democrats have to stop thinking that what the voters dream about is to be hassled. Music. That's what this whole conversation is really exposing. Not just excessive regulation, but a total failure of proportion. A failure to distinguish between serious threats and trivial nonsense. A failure to recognize when oversight has crossed over into suffocation. A failure to understand that a society cannot function well if every useful thing takes forever and costs a fortune before it's even allowed to begin. And once that failure becomes cultural, it spreads everywhere. It touches housing, energy, business, transportation, construction, and daily life. It doesn't always show up as one giant dramatic collapse. Sometimes it shows up as 1,000 smaller frustrations that collectively make people feel like nothing works anymore. Death by a million forms. That's why this issue resonates so much. It's not abstract. It's personal. It's the feeling of getting nickel and dimed by a system that claims it's helping you. It's the feeling of doing everything right and still getting buried in delays. It's the feeling of watching obvious common sense get crushed under technicalities, warnings, committees, and endless procedural junk. At some point, people stop asking for perfection. They just want sanity back. They want a government that can tell the difference between real danger and bureaucratic cosplay. They want rules that solve actual problems instead of manufacturing new ones. They want systems that encourage building, fixing, improving, and moving forward instead of turning every normal action into a test of endurance. They want adults in charge who understand that the goal of public policy is not to hassle people into submission. And if that sounds like a low bar, that's because it is. Which makes it even more embarrassing that so many leaders keep tripping over it. The larger lesson here is simple. A state does not become strong by regulating every inch of life. It becomes strong when it protects what matters, gets out of the way when it should, and remembers that citizens are not lab rats in a giant management experiment. Rules are supposed to serve people. People are not supposed to serve the rules. That's the line California keeps blurring. And that's why the backlash is growing louder. Because when government becomes a permanent obstacle to ordinary life, people eventually stop seeing it as helpful. They see it as the thing standing in the way. And honestly, they're not wrong. So, yeah, laugh at the absurdity. Laugh at the wood dust panic. Laugh at the endless inspections. Laugh at the idea that every object in your life needs a warning label and every project needs 12 signatures. But also pay attention because underneath the jokes is a serious point. When a government becomes obsessed with controlling every tiny possibility, it can end up strangling the very progress it claims to champion. That's the trap. That's the contradiction. And that's why more people are finally calling it out. If you enjoyed this, drop your thoughts in the comments. What's the dumbest regulation or permit nightmare you've ever dealt with? Hit like, subscribe, and stick around for more because when common sense goes missing, somebody has to say it out loud. And real quick before you go, if you want more direct political coverage and fast breakdowns of the biggest news stories, I've got a new channel called Blue Check News. Head over there, subscribe, and I'll see you on that channel, too. You will find the link in the description.